Something could have taken 6 months, and all of a sudden with AI, it took only 24 to 48 hours, which means that now I have access to vaccine across the world much more faster. AI plays an extremely important role to screen millions of compounds to identify not only the potential compound is still a large number. Although recently FDA came up with a guideline wherein they said, hey, maybe AI can play a role to replace animal testing.
I was about to ask that.
Right?
Yes.
Because animal testing is not ethical. By 2030, it is projected that 75% of all deaths across the world will be due to incommunicable diseases.
Hello and welcome to TALRadio. AI is creeping in almost all industries, and we are on a quest to understand how it's going to affect you and me. And for the exact thing, we have Mr. Murali Krishnam. He has 30 years of experience with clinical trials, and he's product strategist at Solix. And he's just the guy to tell us what's happening in pharma with AI. Hello, Mr. Murali. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Archita. Thanks for having me here today. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I was just catching up with my news today, and I saw the headline that NVIDIA just announced their top survey for the year, right? In terms of how AI is adopting. Interestingly, year over year, consistently, healthcare and life sciences have topped that list, right? In terms of overall AI adoption. So again, it's a coincidence, right?
Okay.
That we are having that topic
Yes.
and discussion today. At the same time, if you look at it, you kind of touched upon AI. It's in every industry, it's everywhere. But there's also an inflection point. So what I mean by is, as AI breakthroughs are happening, at the same time, scientific breakthroughs are also happening, right? That's creating an inflection point, right? When you have an inflection point like this, you create a force multiplier. So which means that now I can have drugs discovered and manufactured much more faster than before. So which means that patients will have access to personalized medicine a lot more cheaper and faster, right? As you know, cancer is becoming a lot more common nowadays, right? And cancer is a great example of terminal illness, meaning that it's highly genetic by nature. So now if there are like thousands of varieties of cancers, it's impossible to create 1,000 types of medicines, right? So that's where AI can play a role to find personalized cure for every type of cancer,
Wow.
right? Because every cancer type will have different genetic mutations.
And with every person, it also changes a little bit.
Exactly, right? So that's the scale, right? Without AI, it's extremely impossible to scale, to find a cure for every type of cancer out there with every genetic mutations.
I would like to also go back to the basics
Sure.
and understand pharma. Because when I read or hear pharma, I understand that it's the business of making medicine. And we were talking about it yesterday, and you said that it is more deeper and it is more connected to the healthcare more than we understand. Please tell us more about that.
Absolutely. Again, a great question. So if you look at like a pyramid, right? Patient is at the top of the value chain, which means that everything either healthcare or pharma does, it's all about patient. So that's called patient centricity. Now, as you keep coming down the value chain, think this as two different areas of, or rather two disciplines. One is healthcare, where patients get a treatment. Like, I talk about hospitals, clinics, right? You go to labs, right? So they're all healthcare system, which is also called as bedside. Bedside because the hospitals have beds, so it's also called bedside, right? So again, I know you talked about pharma. Pharma by itself is not everything. There's a much larger umbrella called life sciences.
Okay.
So within life sciences, you have biotechs, you have pharma, and medtech.
Okay.
So biotechs are companies that focuses on biology. That is, they look at living organisms like, bacteria, fungi, yeast, right? And through that, they help to find new cure. The cure could be vaccine or an antibody. So those are biotechs. Then you also have pharma. Now, pharma does not look at biological organisms, but they look at chemical synthesis, right?
Okay.
Now, this chemical synthesis helps you to create molecules or drugs. Versus biotechs help you to create from biological organisms to vaccines.
Okay.
Now, the third pillar is medtech. Medtech is essentially companies like X-ray manufacture X-ray machines, MRIs, ECG, EKG, and so forth. Right now, life sciences is also called as bench side. So there's a bedside and a bench side.
Okay.
Healthcare is bedside, life sciences is a bench side. Now, one thing is extreme important to understand is that they're all highly interconnected. Right now, life sciences cannot find a new drug if they don't understand what are the diseases that are prevalent. So healthcare plays a important role to do what is called as population health analysis, to look at all their population to find out what's happening, right? When patients are coming in, are there new types of diseases for which we don't have a cure? Are there variations? Are there new indications, right? So in collaboration with academia, researchers, to universities, industry, they keep publishing what is called as publications, right? And all these experts are combined together called key opinion leaders.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So these KOLs are extremely important from the ecosystem point of view, and healthcare plays a major role based on the pharma knows what drugs to manufacture. See, pharma cannot manufacture or manufacture a drug between four walls. Unless you have the data from healthcare system like EHR to journals, publications, they cannot manufacture. Now, other way is also important. That is, once pharma figures out what drug to discover and manufacture, and once they start marketing, healthcare has to prescribe those medicines. And once those medicines are prescribed to patients, you have to continuously keep tracking the data to see physician prescribed a drug for diabetes, right? Was there a side effect? Or did it cure the disease? So that feedback has to go back to the pharma.
How does that happen?
That's where things like EHR, EMR are very important because these systems capture what is called as outcomes, patient outcomes, right? So claims data, like insurance claims data, EHR data, they capture all this data. Every time if a patient goes to a doctor or hospital, he or she will interact with the physician. So all the conversations, lab results, everything will go into EHR. That will also show that, hey, if the patient took a diabetes drug, was there a increase in blood pressure, right? Or if they took a drug for diabetes, but the patient also had another disease, it helped the other disease also, right? So all this data will get back into pharma. Pharma analyzes that, and then they start figuring out, oh, what do you do with the data? Do I need to add more information on the medicine, right? Called a label. So label is on this medicine packet where you'll see very small prints called safety warnings, right? So let's say in clinical trial, when you do a clinical trial, let's say you didn't find that side effect, but you found that side effect when it was prescribed, right? So now pharma has an obligation to go back and expand that label information to say that, oh, now there's another side effect for taking this drug.
So it's a continuous editing process.
Exactly.
They keep adding the new data and the new information they get.
Exactly.
And do they also modify their drug or no?
They could if very rare situations. Because think about it, right? You go through FDA clinical trial. It's very extensive, right? Modification happens in rare scenarios. Things like, you want to change the dosage, right? Where instead of originally prescribed dosage, you want to increase the dosage or decrease the dosage, right? So you need to change the formulation. Or in cases like you took the drug for a specific disease, but you found that that was effective for a different disease as well. That's called label expansion. Now, pharma has to not only notify FDA, but they also have to do a process called label expansion to indicate what are the different indications for which it's effective. Right? So, as you see, it's highly interconnected.
Yes,
right?
and it's very complicated also.
It's more than complicated, it's more involved. Right? So, I'll give another example.
Yes.
Right? So, just because a physician prescribed a medicine or a drug to a patient doesn't mean that patient is very well informed whether that drug is the right drug for him or her, right? So there's something called patient support. So now pharma also runs something called patient support, which does things like social support, education, right, emotional support, wherein they ensure that patient is fully informed before start taking this medicine.
Okay.
Right? So pharma plays a very important role in patient support. Now, you could also have a scenario where patients might not have financial ability to spend money on the drugs. If it's an extremely expensive drug, right? Or they're not able to pay insurance co-pays. Now, pharma also does what is called patient assistance programs,
Okay.
through which they actually take up some of the costs through coupons, paying the patient co-pays. That way, patient has access to the drugs, right? So it's all intertwined, right, between healthcare and pharma. So healthcare cannot succeed without pharma, and pharma cannot succeed without healthcare.
So when you say pharma, it's purely the business of making medicines.
Discovering and making medicines.
With the support of the other
Correct.
bedside
Correct.
data.
Correct.
Yes. But tell us more about the process of making medicine.
Sure.
And the life of medicine, how it works, what happens. Because hearing you, it's a little complicated how much, so many people are involved and we are talking about real lives.
Yeah.
So
it's a very fascinating thing, right? Again, I'm not saying that it's as fascinating as launching a rocket to space, but it's still very involved, right? So I'll try to see if I can simplify it. Typically, the life of a drug goes through 6-step process.
Okay.
Right? The first step is I kind of touched upon it earlier. Is really creating that hypothesis. Right? Hypothesis as to what is the prevalent disease. Is there a hypothesis around what type of drug can be effective for that prevalent disease? Right? Now, this hypothesis cannot be created just sitting around four walls. Right? Researchers have to go through tons of materials like EHR data to publications that are published through key opinion leaders and identify what are those prevalent disease areas and what type of drugs can be effective, and they come up with a hypothesis, right? So that is the step number one. Now, once that is done, this step number two is called as drug discovery, right? So drug discovery is a process where you screen millions of compounds, right? Which is usually a very manual mechanism, right? Now, researchers go through data from millions of compounds before they can identify a very promising compound, right? Now, that is called drug discovery. There's many steps within that, right? Hit identification to lead compound to validation as well as optimization. Now, that's where AI can play a significant role, right? So instead of having scientists scout through millions of compounds, there is a very specific area called virtual screening, right?
Okay.
So AI plays an extremely important role to screen millions of compounds to identify not only the potential compound is still a large number, right? From millions of compounds, you probably come to hundreds of thousands of compounds. That is called hit identification, right? So wherein you find the potential compounds. Then you go through the process of, like I talked about, validation, right? Just because your AI screened millions of compounds, you don't know if it's effective or not, right? You need to look at structural mechanisms and everything. So you validate in the labs, then you optimize it, and then towards the end you find the most promising compounds, wherein AI plays a significant role. So that's step number 2. Now, step number 3 is called as animal testing, right? So wherein you test the drug on lab animals like rats, monkeys, and so forth, right? Here the importance is to make sure animals are safe, right? Animal testing is all about safety. Of course, efficacy, meaning is it effective or not, also plays a role. But safety of the animal and the right dosage is a very important combination, right? Although recently FDA came up with a guideline wherein they said, hey, maybe AI can play a role to replace animal testing.
I was about to ask that.
Right?
Yes.
Because animal testing is not ethical.
Yeah.
Right? You're testing something on animals that can't speak, can't think. It's not ethical. So there's been ongoing debate for several decades. Finally, FDA came up with a guideline saying that yes, now you can use AI, and here's the reason behind it. Right? Over the last several decades, animals have been tested for every disease across every drug category, which means that there's enough data available, right? From all this animal testing for several decades, that's enough to train your models, meaning AI models, that can substitute animal testing through different mechanisms, right? So that is really your stage 3. Now, your stage 4 is called as clinical trials, right? Wherein you test it on humans, right? And again, you go through step-by-step approach. So typically, there are 3 phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 of clinical trial, you test on humans with a smaller population, typically less than 100 people or 100 patients. Again, here the focus is on safety of the patients and dosage, meaning that when I test this within less than 100 patients, is it causing any deaths? Is it causing any side effects? Right? So that is called phase 1, focused on safety and dosage. Now, once you pass through that, you go to what is called as a phase 2, where you increase your patient population, typically from 100 to 300 patients. Now, here you look at, again, safety, dosage, but you also look at, is this effective on the patients, right? Then in phase 3, you go for much larger population, typically 300 to 3,000. Sometimes if you are running a global clinical trial across all the countries, it will go to even 10,000 to 100,000 also, right? So wherein in phase 3, you look at, again, safety, but you also see, are the treatments effective in a real world? Not just in a smaller population, but in larger population, right? So that is typically a 4th stage. Now, 5th stage is called FDA review. Regulatory bodies have to review the data, right? So that's where scientists bring all the data together. They analyze it, they collate it, they create hundreds of pages of documents and submit to FDA. Now, FDA can review it. They could say that, hey, everything looks good. They'll approve, or they might reject, or they may ask for more information. Now, AI can play a role again here, right? So that is, instead of humans spending months together to create all these documents, now AI can be trained with prior data to automatically generate all these medical writing documents, things like clinical study reports, right? And clinical study reports, also called CSRs, goes thousands of pages sometimes, right? Now, AI can generate these documents automatically to be able to speed up the overall process and also the accuracy, right? So that's really this step 5. Now, step 6 is what is called as post-market surveillance. So we kind of touched upon it earlier, where once a drug is marketed, once patients start taking drugs, it's important for pharma to continuously keep looking at what is called as real-world data, right, or RWD. So this is EHR, claims, you have your wearable devices, Fitbits and all those things. So you keep continuously collecting all the data, and you do what is called as safety monitoring, right? That way, you're ensuring that it's still safe to use, and it's effective enough. That way, you keep an eye on how it's working in real world setting, right? So as you see, it's very elaborate. right? From all the way from coming up with a hypothesis for a drug to start monitoring how the drug is performing in real world is a very extensive process. But it's also very well established as well.
Yes.
Right.
I think it is. There's a reason why it is that elaborate.
Exactly.
I would like to come back to the second step where you mentioned about animal testing. Second step, right? So you mentioned that AI can play a really big part there because we can eliminate animals altogether and replace it with AI. How AI works on data.
Correct.
It doesn't generate its own data, right?
Correct.
So how will we know if something new is coming up to us? Because I think the whole point of testing on animals or even on humans is to understand if there's something new happening to them, which is not discovered yet.
Yeah.
So how will we cater to that?
So again, very, very interesting, so to speak, right? So AI is not just to analyze data, but AI can create data as well, right? So that is called digital twin.
Okay.
So which means that when FDA said, hey, here is the guidelines to have AI replace animal testing, basically what it means is that can you create a virtual animal? It's called as a digital twin, right? So with all the historical data that you have testing drugs with animals, you can take the data and you can simulate and create digital twins, which means that next time if I have a new drug to test, now I'm testing it on a digital twin, not on real animals.
So just to explain it to our listeners even more elaborately,
Sure.
you are saying that there will be a mouse which just whose skin will be like a mouse. I mean, if not physically the skin, but
Right.
data-wise.
Data-wise, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's it's molecular structure, biological structure.
The correct
right?
words.
It is well represented as a real mouse, but not in a physical way, but a digital way, like you said, right? So digital twin is another example where AI can help generate based on your historical data that can be used to replace real animal testing. That's one mechanism.
Yeah. Mr. Murali, what are the projected trends in healthcare from patients' point of view, and how does it look like in coming next 10 years?
You might have heard about a famous law called Moore's law, right? Someone from the technology background, they'll probably understand it. Gordon Moore from Intel, who was one of the co-founder of Intel, I think in 1965 or so, he came up with a law called Moore's law. Basically, what it says is that every 2 years, the number of transistors on a microchip doubles. And at the same time, the cost of these microchips will cut by half every 2 years, right? Now, this is so important because this is what drives innovation. Much more faster, at a higher scale, reduces the cost, right? If you look at pharma, it doesn't go well because in case of pharma, instead of the cost of drug development decreasing, it's increasing, right? So there's a saying called Moore law. So Moore's law literally spelled reverse, called Moore.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Unlike Moore's law, which is more positive and famous, Moore's law is infamous, which says that every 9 years, the cost of finding a new drug doubles.
Okay.
Every 9 years, it doubles, right? Now, it does not bode well. On one side, your healthcare costs are going up, your disease prevalence is going up. On the other side, the cost of finding new drugs are also going up, right?
Yeah.
So it's not balancing. Now, that's where the inflection point of a breakthrough in AI and breakthrough in science is extremely important to reverse the cost of drugs going up, right? I'll give another example in terms of the success ratio, right? Although it's projected that by 2030, pharma is going to spend $360 million or so, if you look at just one drug, it takes $1.5 billion at an average and 15 years to discover and develop a new drug, right?
Okay.
All with only 10% success rate.
Okay.
So which means that 90% of all clinical trials fail. Only 10% ever succeed.
Yeah.
right? So that makes it far more important for AI to than a defensive role. We want it to be offensive role, right? So pharma has a incredible job, right? More so compared to healthcare in terms of finding new drugs, bringing new drugs to market much faster, cheaper, and affordable prices is extremely important.
So with AI, the medicines will be cheaper.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully. Okay. Mr. Murali, you mentioned about making drugs more cheaper and faster. But what are the underlying probable problems that lies when AI analyzes the data? And what kind of data actually AI analyzes when we are talking about making a new medicine?
Very good question, Archita. So let me answer your second part of the question first.
Okay.
That is what types of data that you need. In essence, it's multimodal, right? Multimodal means that you look at a variety of data sets. So it's not just one, but variety of data sets is called multimodal. So let's go through, right? You will need biological data, you need chemical data. Biological data also includes genomics, your chemical and compound data. Then you also need things like your clinical trials data. You need literatures, right? Earlier I talked about where key opinion leaders publish journals, articles, right? So they are all called as literatures. So these are literary documents. So you need those types of data, and you also need the real world data, right? When we say real world data, we think of EHR, EMR, your activity tracking devices, your blood pressure monitors, right? Patient reported outcomes through applications on your phones, right? All this constitutes real world data. So it's truly multimodal in nature, much more complex than any other industry we can think of, right? So that's one part, right? In terms of what data sets you need to train your AI. Now it also creates a lot more complexity. The more data, the more variety of data, it creates a lot more complexity, right? Issues things like inaccurate data, right? If compounds are not labeled properly or mislabeled, you'll have inaccurate data. So which means that your overall your data fabric should ensure that your data is accurate, right? So inaccuracy could be a challenge. Then you also look at data which has a bias, right? So meaning that what if your data represents only a small set of patient population? It's skewed towards only one demographic, right? Which means that your science won't be accurate. So that's bias. Now a third challenge is incomplete data, right? We talked about inaccurate, bias. Now third is incomplete, which means that you probably don't have enough data. So cases like rare diseases, right? In rare diseases, obviously you'll have very few patients, which means that probably you don't have all the data that's required, right? So unless you handle all these three issues or challenges with data, extremely difficult to train your models accurately, right? Your models will start hallucinating, your predictions won't be accurate. So that's where you need to have things like ontologies to ground the truth for AI. That way, your models will be a lot more accurate with less hallucinations, right? So to summarize, the more data, the more challenges, the more AI can play a role, right? To ensure that you create AI-ready data sets that are more effective in your model training.
Is AI replacing scientists or it's more like an assistant to them?
It's one of the hottest topic today, right?
Yes.
Any news articles or news media you talk about, there's so much of fear about people losing jobs, AI replacing companies, AI replacing jobs, and so forth. I think it's very timely, right? Again, every industry is different. So is life sciences. So maybe I'll speak more from a life sciences point of view, right? Again, if you look at life sciences, the predominantly you look at people who come from science background, right? People with either medicinal chemistry or molecular biology, right? So think these are scientists, right? So they come with highly educational background, It takes years of college experience to learn, practice, right? And are they vulnerable? Absolutely, right? There's always a perception that AI can replace anything, right? Now, more than thinking of AI replacing scientists, I would think about, will AI replace scientists who are not equipped with AI or equipped with AI, right?
Okay.
AI is more likely to replace scientists who doesn't want to be equipped with AI, right? They don't believe in AI. They're not equipped with AI. Those are the people who will be most likely replaced by AI. But if you learn how to coexist with AI, right? To your point earlier about using AI as a helping hand, then absolutely you can coexist, right? So AI can coexist with scientists who are equipped with AI, right? So I'll give some examples as to why scientists are still very important as part of the ecosystem, right? There is things like making judgmental call. AI cannot make judgmental call, right? A good example I can talk about is ethical judgment, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're designing a clinical trial, and you had to identify the right patient population. If you don't make a ethical judgmental call, but if you bias towards a specific demographic, then obviously your AI models are not going to be accurate, right? Your clinical trials are not going to be accurate. Now, if you leave that job just to AI to figure out what your population should look like, again, I don't know if AI has the right levers to make that judgmental call, right? AI could also become biased, right? That's why the ethical judgment is best kept to humans. That's why scientists play a huge role in that, right? Now, other areas where scientists play a role is not easy to replace is interpretation of results. So I'll give an example. There's a very specific process called molecular docking, right?
Okay.
When you go through drug discovery process, there's a process called molecular docking. Basically, what it means is that when patients are given medicine, the molecules have to dock to the protein. Think protein as the area where the disease is widespread. So molecule has to dock to a protein. The better it docks, the better the patient gets cured, right? That's called molecular docking. Now, today, AI models are there, like AlphaFold, that can predict the molecular docking, but you still need a human to interpret the results. So what scientists do is they take a 3D model of the docking, they look at color coding, and they determine if the docking is stable or not stable. And that's extremely hard today as we speak for AI to do it. Although AI can do the initial prediction, you still need scientists to be able to validate and interpret that results, right? So now you coexist. AI and scientists coexist through this mechanism. Now, another area to look at is context to data, right? Data itself is not sufficient unless you add context. I'll give a very simple example. Let's say you need to find direction to go from point A to point B, right? Today we all use GPS. What if GPS assumes there's no traffic, right? So it means that from point A to point B, it might say it takes 30 minutes or 45 minutes, right? But what if you add traffic data? Now, traffic data is called context.
Okay.
Right? Now, you can add traffic data based on live capture or maybe based on simulations, right? The moment you add traffic data, now your GPS will come back and say that no, it won't take 30 minutes, it will probably take an hour based on the time of the day, right? So these are all context. Similarly, in drug discovery, when we think of molecular docking, the context could be the environment of where the protein and molecule dock with each other. And that environment is called biological environment, right? Now, this biological environment is not very easy to simulate. So, to give an example, think about water molecules. See, a body has water molecules throughout a body, right? And that's what provides the hydration. Now, it's important to understand what is the composition of water molecules around that area where molecule is docking with your protein. That's a biological environment. Now, AI cannot predict. AI cannot simulate it. Now, what scientists can do is they'll start make certain assumptions. They'll start simulating in their research to say that, oh yeah, great, AI predicted this docking between molecule and protein, but what if add water molecules within that surrounding area? Will it change my prediction? But adding water molecules could speed up the docking, could also stop the docking. It could be positive as well as negative. So if water molecule is in an active site, it blocks the blocking. But if it's in the surrounding site, it increases the docking. So all this adding context is extremely important, and that's where researchers simulate in a lab environment and further add context for AI models, right? So essentially what it means, Archita, is that AI and scientists have to coexist together. Will AI replace scientists? Maybe yes, maybe no, depending upon whether scientists are well equipped to use AI by themselves. If they hesitate, if they shy away, then potentially they could be replaced. If they learn how to coexist, I think there's an opportunity for much greater results.
What would you like to tell to students and people who are looking to get into this field of pharma and the other fields you mentioned, biotech and a lot of similar industries, when they are just joining and they're just fresh out of the college?
Yeah. Again, very well connected to your previous question. Thanks for asking that question. Again, very timely with so much of fear, right? Particularly not just people who have jobs, but also people coming fresh out of college. There seems a lot of confusion in terms of, did I pick the right major, or are there enough jobs and so forth. So the way I'll answer a question is, AI in pharma is multidisciplinary, right? Meaning that you're not just looking at one skill, you're looking at multiple skills, right? There are 4 dimensions to it. One dimension is core technical skills, right? If anyone wants to go venture into AI in pharma, they need to have core programming skills like Python, R, right? They're very essential. Now, the second dimension is called domain knowledge, right? Now, within pharma or medicinal chemistry or pharmacology, picking one of these subject areas is very important, right? Now, third is what are the functional areas we need to look at? Again, we talked about the life cycle of a drug, right? Now, one could say that, hey, I want to be in the manufacturing side, or could be post-marketing surveillance, or could be in animal testing. They're all different functional areas, right? That's the third dimension. So you have to pick and choose where you feel that you can play a role. Now, if you combine all these 3 together, there's another dimension called application area.
Okay.
So we talked about molecular docking as an example, right? AI-based molecular docking is a combination of AI and your traditional process. We talked about screening millions of compounds. Again, combination of AI and your traditional process, right? So by combining all these 3 dimensions I talked about, from core skills to domain knowledge to functional knowledge, I strongly recommend someone to look at the practicality of these applications. Do you feel that you want to be part of molecular docking application area, or a virtual screening application area, or maybe protocol design as an example, right? So that's a 4th dimension. So it's very important for someone to rationalize, not just going with a broad set of skills. Pick all these different dimensions, pick very specific skills within the dimensions, and see how it applies in a practical setting. It could be drug discovery, it could be clinical trials, and so forth, right? And then decide, where you want to pursue your either higher education to, as well as the overall career progression.
Specialization.
Right, exactly.
Great. Would you like to also mention any soft skill which is irrespective of the industry they are going in the AI times? There are some things essential that anybody will be in a plus.
I would say more than soft skills, it's really about ability to analyze
Okay.
and critical thinking. Right? These are extremely important. Right? In front of AI that can think 10 times, 100 times faster than you. You should be able to come with more critical thinking, right? Judgmental calls, right? More analytical skills that helps you to create context and interpretation. Earlier I talked about context, adding context to data and interpretation. They're all analytical skills, right? So it's more about analytical skills and critical thinking than soft skill is my take.
Definitely. Thank you so much for speaking with us and sharing such insightful details about AI and pharma and how it's going to be in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.